Hello, everyone.
How's it going?
Welcome to our, gosh, what month are we in? March? Yes, March. It's almost St. Patrick's Day.
The Ides of March.
Yes. Welcome to our March SipScout party. We are thrilled to have you here.
We're going to be talking about some delicious beers and a little bit of lore about, drinking beer, particularly drinking beer in Ireland.
St. Patrick's Day, all sorts of fun stuff, because that's tomorrow, and we're wearing our green. We're getting the St. Patrick's Day party started early. Yes. So for those of you who have been to SipScout parties in the past, first, thank you for returning and coming back for more. We are thrilled to have you here. And you might notice that it's a little different this month. So we've decided to change things up a little bit. So if you recall, last month we featured some wines from Master of the World, and they are really a fun organization that helps really professionals, people who are really trying to hone their palates, or people who are super into geeky wine, and what they do each month or when they have their kits is they do it in webinar format, where we typically do it in meeting format.
Right.
And we attended a couple of their events and we kind of kept debating and talking. We were like, man, we do kind of like that webinar format for a few reasons.
Yeah, there's some nice elements to it, the opportunity for people to kind of engage without necessarily feeling compelled to be on screen.
Or feeling bad about not having their camera on, right? So we always did meeting format because we're very comfortable being on camera. We love it to feel like a party. We love to not just be talking to a screen that looks like ourselves. We like to be seeing all of your faces, seeing your beers, seeing what you're doing. But we recognize that a lot of times people feel pressured to turn their camera on. They don't necessarily want to. So we're going to try this out. We're going to try webinar format where no one else can see you. We can't see you. Your videos are all kind of, your own. So, but then what we are going to do is, so we're going to do this in a webinar format for the first, 45 minutes to an hour, something like that, where we are teaching, educating, talking about the fun stuff. And then for the last part of it, we will allow everyone to turn their cameras on if they want to, if they want to stay, if they want to stay for kind of more of a happy hour feel, get to know other people, schmooze, things of that nature. So if the format feels a little different to you this week, or this month, you're not crazy.
You're not alone.
You're not crazy. So let us know what you think after this one. If you like the old format, if you like the new format, we'll kind of keep playing around with it because we're a community here. And for those of you who are new for the first time, welcome. We are thrilled to have you here. Everyone has their beers. So this is the order that we're going to be tasting in right here. We'll start with the Sullivan, move to the Second Chance, then we'll head on over to Ahara's, and then we'll finish off with Brewyard. So that's the order we're going to taste in. What else do people need to know?
Got any glasses?
Yes.
We would recommend drinking out of glasses.
Yeah, don't drink out of the cans or bottles. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. But if you've ever had a cold and, someone orders pizza and you're all excited for pizza, but you have a cold and you take a bite and you're like, that tastes like
a big
cardboard.
idea.
Yeah, it's because a big part of what you taste comes from what you smell, actually.
Yeah.
And so if you're drinking it from a can or a bottle, you're not smelling anything because this is kind of blocking you. So we actually really prefer small glasses because, especially with something carbonated like beer, the carbonation dissipates and then you can't smell as much once that happens. So being able to pour a little bit, smell it, drink it, then pour some more, do it again. And it also will stay a little colder in your can.
Yeah, if you have the opportunity each time you take a sip of beer to have it kind of freshly poured, the release of the aromas from the carbonation, from the bubbling, is allowing there to be more there for your nose to pick up. So
absolutely.
Our recommendation.
Absolutely. So since we are in this new webinar format this month, that might, for those of you who have been here a few times before, you might be like, hey, wait a minute, I can't just unmute myself and jump on in and ask a question. We still want you to jump on in and ask your question. So you have two different ways you can do that. You can use the chat. And if you use the chat, everyone sees that. You can chat with other people. You can comment on what people said, or you can do the more formal route, which is submit a specific question that you really want us to answer. And that's the Q&A. Either way works for us, whatever you want to do. So feel free to submit questions or chat or whatever you think.
Yeah.
But we would love it if those of you who are here, throw in the chat where where you're joining from. If you're Irish, if you're excited for St. Patrick's Day, if you're excited about these Irish beers, whatever you want to share with us, feel free. You'll just have to do it via typing a little bit instead of talking and on camera like we've done in the past until the end.
Of course. So we're going to get started here sharing some of the information that is available to you in the digital resources that you can find a link to on the SipScout report that was included. And if you would like to check those out, feel free to do so, but we're going to share them on our screen here as well. And these are just handy resources when you're tasting as opposed to drinking, I guess, was the easiest way to kind of define the difference for us. The beer sensory wheel that you can see here gives you kind of an outline of the primary towards the center of the wheel, categories of aromas that you might be perceiving. And then on the outside, some of the more specific examples of aromas within each category. And so when you're tasting a beer and kind of picking up what you perceive and what you might like or not like, this can be a really helpful way for you to feel more confident and speak more specifically about what it is you're loving or you're not.
And this is honestly, whether you're a pro like Evan, who has a very refined palate and kind of does things like this and kind of tests himself often, or if you are, you know, just casual and wanting to like understand your own palate better, be able to explain to other people what kind of, especially if you go to a brewery or if you go somewhere and you want to be able to explain to people without saying, I want an IPA, but you say, you know, I really like things that are a little more resiny or have some of that cooked vegetable taste or whatever it may be, right? This is what helps you do that. So trying to push yourself to kind of use this for both aromas and tastes.
Cooked vegetable. I mean, if we're talking about Ireland and Irish beer and St. Patrick's Day, give me some cooked cabbage.
Yeah.
Bring it on.
Yeah. And so then you also have, so the beer sensory wheel. So again, this is linked in your SipScout report. I believe it is bit.ly/beer wheels or beer tasting. I can look at it in a minute when I'm not sharing. But then the second page of this is the hop kind of deep dive and then the malt deep dive. And then you want to talk a little bit about hops and malts and their role.
Yeah. So malt is what is used to make beer. You're malting usually primarily barley to make most beers. Historically, that was what a lot of the beer producing regions were capable of growing. More recently, you might have seen advertisements kind of belittling Bud Light for using rice in their beer. And other, you know, if you've ever seen an oatmeal stout that's used or that's made using oats. Basically, any kind of grain can be incorporated into the production of a beer, but barley is the base grain that you see most frequently, and the barley that's used is malted. So malt characteristic in a beer refers to what is contributed to the flavor and aroma characteristics in a beer from the different types of malted barley that you can find, and how heavily malted they are. I guess that's a little bit of a misnomer. Malted barley is any barley that is essentially sprouted. It's a grain, which is a seed, and before you can actually turn it into an alcoholic beverage, you have to make it begin to grow. It turns the carbohydrates and it changes those starches into a form that can be then broken down into sugar, which then turns into alcohol.
So heat has to be applied, essentially.
Right. So the malting process is done to any kind of barley.
So that would be malty, right? When we're looking at this malt deep dive, like if it's just heated to help it sprout on kind of that early stage of it, it would be this cookie, biscuit, bready kind of flavors. And then the longer they allow that heat to kind of be applied to like roast it almost.
Yeah. So yeah, almost precisely, but stepping it back, like there's an in-between. In order to gain to the next stages, to caramel and to dried fruit and to toasty and to roast, you're then kilning and actually cooking the barley. So it sits at a stage that basically makes the seed wake up. It thinks that, hey, it's springtime. Hey, it's springtime. It's the Ides of March.
Yeah.
And it's time to start growing. If they were planted in the ground, the soil reaches a certain temperature and there's enough moisture and they sprout. And then they move it into the kiln, and then you see this progression of what the malt can become with regard to how long they essentially toast it.
Right.
And that's why a lot of these flavor profiles you can align with flavors that you get when you're baking bread or any number of other things that involve grain and baking.
And if you're a whiskey lover, this might sound familiar to single malt scotches, right? Malting peaty versus non-peaty, because a part of this is also like, what is the fuel source for that heat that you're applying to it, right? So that might sound a little familiar from the whiskey world as well, this malting kind of procedure.
Very much so.
And then the hop side of things is more that citrusy, tropical, fruity, floral kind of element that brings some brightness to a beer. So that's how I think of it. Maltiness is kind of that depth that a beer might have, and hops are that brightness that a beer might have. And there are elements of both in a lot of beers, and most beers, honestly. Some kind of squarely, IPAs are much more in the hop kind of character, and stouts and things are much more in the malt kind of character.
Yeah, additionally, initially hops, the addition of hops to beer, because beer really would have existed in a very different form that we would understand it, were it not for the addition of hops. The balance and also the longevity of beers would have been drastically diminished if we didn't figure out how hops can influence the flavor profile and how much they allow the beer to be shelf stable.
Yeah, absolutely. Which was the original purpose of hops, not for the beautiful flavoring and aromas that we use them for today.
Right.
Yeah.
Hops generally fall into two categories. There's bittering hops, which a lot of the noble hops that you find in, kind of classic European style beer making are found. And then there's aromatic hops, and you see those a lot more in kind of contemporary American style IPAs.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about that, we've all had IPAs or things where like on that back palate is like that like bitterness. The West Coast IPAs tend to like be a little bit more bitter. And then we've had some where it just like smells like you're in a grassy field and it's hitting you in the face with these aromas, but the flavor isn't necessarily all that bitter or all that, tart. So those are kind of the differences there. So you have these resources. We're bringing them up here and sharing them for a moment and talking about them a little bit, because as we go through these beers, we would suggest that you pull these up yourself and you be looking at them and thinking about them as you're thinking about, what am I smelling? What am I tasting? And sharing those thoughts and comments with all of us in the chat.
And we're back.
All right, there we go.
I feel like we've gone far too long without having a sip of beer.
We certainly have.
Let's
crack open our first beer, shall we? And again, feel free to throw questions, comments, anything you have in the chat and in the Q&A. This is new for us too. We feel a little alone up here being in webinar format instead of meeting format. So keep us company in the chat.
I got you, babe. We're pouring the Sullivan's the Irish Golden Ale first. This is a very similar style to what some of you may have seen as a cream ale. A common comparative might be Boddington's, and the main difference is that Boddington's is pressurized with nitrogen, whereas this is carbonated. The cream texture that you get from a beer that uses nitrogen to pressurize it is just a little bit softer. It's not quite as vibrant and like tingly on your tongue, which is where the kind of cream moniker became incorporated.
And this is kind of fun because today we are going to taste through two Irish craft beers that are from Ireland, and then we'll also be tasting through two American Irish style craft beers. And so this first one that we're tasting through is actually from Ireland. And let's
launch it.
Exactly.
Gaelic for health, which is cheers in, I don't know, half the languages.
This has some malty depth for it, given how light and good. So a lot of times people, when they think of malt, they think anything brown or dark in color is malty, right? But sometimes, and this is a great example of that, I think, you can have a lighter color beer that maybe doesn't look like it's going to taste super malty, but has that like biscuity toasty kind of taste to it. And this to me definitely does.
And a lot of that has to do with the, use of hops that can complement or sometimes overpower a malt profile that's maybe a little bit restrained because it isn't heavily kilned and extra toasty. So these kind of cream ales or golden ales, I feel like are something of a staple in Irish public houses. These kind of are their session beers. This is something that, because it's not terribly overwhelming for your palate, it's something that you can kind of casually sip on throughout
While
the
you're
day.
watching Ted Lasso.
I just read recently, the town that Ted Lasso is filmed in England, is the report that I read was that they're essentially too snooty to even care that Ted Lasso is filmed there, and we're big fans.
We're big Ted Lasso. And Ted Lasso is British, not Irish, of course, but their pub culture in Ted Lasso is
similar.
Makes me think of, sitting around watching a soccer game, football game, as they would call it over there, and drinking a few of these versus having, something that might be a little heavier that you can only have one or two of. Yeah. And Sullivan's has a really interesting story because they were around in the early,
way back when.
Yeah. So they actually, Sullivan's was a brewery that actually closed in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think of, like 1900, the early
That's
1900s, they
closed.
right? And this was a brewery that was brought back essentially. So,
descendants, like multiple generations past the closure of the brewery, decided to bring back their family name and restart the Sullivan Brewery. It's a brewery that meant a lot to the community that was in. The number of breweries in Ireland have dwindled over the years with the acquisition and kind of combining of breweries and the brewing being outsourced to larger locations for these multinational corporations. And they restarted it
in 2016, I believe.
Yeah, it's relatively recently. With another family that's very well known in Irish world.
Heard of them?
Smithwick's, if you've been to an Irish pub, Smithwick's is a pretty common tap handle that you'd see at an Irish pub. So they got together with the Smithwick family and they said, hey, we want to bring the Sullivan name back. And here it is. I feel like it's really quite delicious. And again, that finish that you get when the malt characteristic is allowed to shine through. And what they do, I think it's something that we pointed out in the SipScout report, is they do an early and a late hop addition, as opposed to maybe a continual hop addition. And that midpoint allows the initial hops to kind of get cooked down a little bit. And then there's a little bit that they, when they add it at the end, that's fresher and brighter and shines through and gives it a little bit more of the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. You may have noticed I just launched a poll. So we're going to have a few poll questions throughout our session tonight that are related to St. Patrick's Day and also Irish beer specifically. So our first one is about why is St. Patrick's Day celebrated tomorrow, right? So we'll see what everyone thinks. Hey, I'm curious on this beer. It's kettle hopped. Is that what you were kind of just referring to, or what does the kettle part of it mean?
So you can basically hop the beer while it's kind of cooking, or afterwards. And if you're cooking in a kettle, there's a little bit more of a precision to it.
Okay.
Because you've got, the open flame as opposed to just like maybe a recirculating electric controlled temperature influx, like sous vide versus open, like on an open fire.
On a flame. Okay. Interesting.
And so adding the hops can be a very delicate thing because something that's already bitter, if it gets burnt, is going to become more bitter. So the early hop addition, while it continues to cook, you have to be careful not to let it get too hot,
Bitter.
or those
Right.
early hop additions will become more bitter than you necessarily want them to be.
Interesting. Okay, cool. All right, it looks like everyone is in, or most people are in on our first poll, and we are split 50-50. Is it the day he was born, or is it the
Ooh.
day he died?
I have a question to pose to you.
Oh, wait, yeah, go ahead.
How many people of ancient times do they even know when they were born?
Or when they died,
Do they
even
even
for that
know?
matter.
Well, I mean,
You know, I guess more.
they might know when they died, depending on how lucid they are.
Yeah.
But if they're famous enough to be remembered for 500 years, the people around them.
Yeah. So the answer is, it's the day that St. Patrick died. And St. Patrick died in, I think it was like 461 current era,
A long time ago.
long ass time ago.
They remember him though.
But that is to your point. I'm like, really, back in 461, someone recorded March 17th, 461, like firmly.
And I mean, even
so
back then, maybe March was still the first month of the year,
who knows? Right?
which, by the way,
March
it
used to be the first month of the year.
in the Roman calendar.
Yeah.
We learned that at trivia recently. We went to trivia night, and one of the trivia categories was the Ides of March. I think we got that one wrong, but
Yeah,
we ended up winning trivia.
we did win trivia. Our team won trivia. It pays to live in a small town in San Francisco. If we went to a bar in San Francisco when we used to live there, we would have never won trivia. But in Cottonwood, Arizona, we can bring it.
Yep.
All right, cool. So what do you guys think about this beer? Again, this is so weird for me because I can't just ask you guys and expect you to unmute yourselves, but throw in the chat, thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you like it? Do you have questions about it?
I propose that this is going to be my favorite.
You do? You think so? All right. Well, we'll see. I do really like the can art, I have to say, because it like transports you to Ireland a little bit, you know?
I think it's because it reminds you a lot of one of your other favorite beers, Fort Point.
Oh, I could see that a little bit.
I mean, the way that it's like kind of stick figures.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway,
My best friend in high school, last name was Sullivan too.
maybe
so
some sentimental.
helps a little bit as well. Oh, Vicky likes it. Great. Awesome. We love that. Yeah, I really like golden ales.
Yeah, I feel like this is a really easy go-to and
Mhm.
you're not particularly like driven to do something that's off.
Yeah.
This is akin enough to what I think most people, at least in this country, were kind of introduced to as to like what beer is flavor profile wise.
Sure.
It's a little richer, it's a little bit more expressive, but it's not like the difference between a lager and then jumping into like a super bitter IPA or, you know, a heavy porter or something like that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So as we walk through these beers, we're going to kind of weave in a little bit of some tasting techniques. So one of the things we really like to do with our SipScout members is, you know, teach them how to taste things in a way that will allow them to better get to know their palate and explain to people what they like and what they don't like and learn more so that they can find more amazing beers and wines
That's
and
the hope.
whiskeys that they like. So it's 5 steps. You want to walk, like, just give us the high level of kind of the 5 steps of tasting.
Essentially it's the 5 S's. So you've got sight. Initially you evaluate it visually.
Mhm.
With beer, the depth of color can be an indication of the kilning process where the malt gets toasted before it is then cooked with water so that the sugars can be turned into alcohol. And you can also see sometimes a little bit of clarity or translucency variation. I know the first time that I saw a Hefeweizen, I was like, wait, what's wrong with that beer? But
Yeah, the cloudiness.
the cloudiness is that you might find in some beers is not something that you need to be concerned about. It is oftentimes an indication of an addition of something other than beer. I'm sorry, something other than barley. With Hefeweizen, it's wheat, or just a really heavy, thick amount of the malt. So with this last beer that we'll have, this is just a very deeply colored beer because it's toasted to the point that it's essentially roasted, almost like a coffee bean. not a whole lot to be gleaned from that first step, but it is something that
I do think the malting,
lot of
like
times
what you
people-
expect from a malt characteristic going in is helpful.
yeah, well, there's not a lot to expect. I think that people often kind of overlook the impact that the visual appearance of something has on their expectations. There's a Japanese saying that you eat first with your eyes. And if something doesn't look appealing, it doesn't matter how good it might taste. If you look at it and you're like, gross, the chances are that when you taste it, you're going to not like it as much as you might otherwise. So they try and make them look pretty, but sometimes people see something that's cloudy and then they're already kind of put off by it.
And that's something, now that you're in the know and part of the Crafty Cask crew, don't let cloudiness scare you away, even in spirits. So there are, because some of that sometimes is it might not be filtered as heavily, and that goes for beer as well, that they might not be filtering things out quite as heavily. But with spirits in particular, it's all about filtration. And if you're not filtering as much out, you tend to be leaving some more flavor behind. The brands that really like have to filter super heavily, a lot of times that means what they're starting with is not super high quality ingredients, right? Whereas if you start with very high quality ingredients, you don't want to take much out of that by the time you get it to bottle ready. And so you want to leave those esters and those heavier oils and everything in there because they contribute to flavor. So if you are interested in, you know, a vodka or a whiskey and it looks a little,
wine
or wine too, and it looks a little cloudy, don't let that think that like, oh, that's probably not good. That actually is like, ooh, that might be great. Like,
Yeah.
let me try that.
If you imagine the quality spectrum with, you know, high here and low here, filtering will bring them both towards here.
Yeah.
Filtering can remove flaws, but it can also remove brilliance, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
The next step after you have,
Wait, can we do our poll first?
oh
This
sure,
is a fun one.
oh yeah, this is a good one.
Why is St. Patrick's Day associated with drinking so heavily? So St. Patrick liked beer so much he had his own personal brewer. Some people voted for that. That's true. Absolutely. He had his own personal brewer, and I think he was
You're
a
right.
monk. I think which makes sense. Monks brewed back then.
They were in
So,
charge of beer for
Yeah.
a very long time. The church controlled beer,
Yep.
wine.
Yep. So he did have a
Mhm.
personal brewer. The second one, in Ireland, bishops allowed Christians to drop their Lenten sacrifice every year on St. Patrick's Day after his death. Also correct. This is
Can
a
anyone guess where the third answer lands?
because it's during Lent, those who partake tend to overdo it on their one cheat day. Also true. So this is a little bit of a trick question. All three of these are true, actually. So yeah, as the story goes, St. Patrick died. He happened to die during Lent, which Christians take very seriously. And, you know,
Catholics in
our-
particular.
yes, Catholics in particular. And, you know, the Lenten sacrifice is kind of like giving up something you really enjoy and giving up something fun. So not surprisingly, a lot of people give up alcohol during Lent. And so when he passed away and the church said, hey, St. Patrick was very important to us, we can kind of forego the Lenten sacrifice for this one day, people tended to overdo it a little bit because they knew that next day they had to not drink anymore again. So they were like, woohoo, this is my one cheat day. So all
No
three of
hair
those-
dog for them.
yeah, really. So all three of these are true, which is kind of fun. And also, you know, I think St. Patrick's Day was not associated with drinking as heavily as it is now back in Ireland. And actually
Sure.
for decades, and maybe even more than decades, based on when he passed away, it was really a quite somber celebration. And in Ireland, alcohol was not, like, pubs weren't open. Alcohol wasn't really like a thing on
Religious
holidays. So for a very long time, there were no pubs that were open on St. Patrick's Day at all. And actually there's some funny stat that the only place you could get alcohol on St. Patrick's Day was like in later years was a dog show. No, it was a dog show. It was actually like best in show, like a best in show kind of dog show. So people who like wanted to drink would go to the dog show because that was the only place you could get booze on St. Patrick's Day.
Wow.
But then people saw, you know, some of the fun that other countries were having with St. Patrick's Day, and now Ireland has adopted some of those as well. But yes, originally it was a very Catholic and somber holiday indeed.
the recognition of a saint.
Exactly. To St. Patrick.
To St. Patrick. I've moved on and poured myself a little splash of the Second Chance Mulligan Amber Ale. And the next part of the tasting technique that we want to touch on is the idea of kind of swirling glass, the beverage that you have. This technique with a small glass like I'm using is a little bit challenging, but an alternative to do this is kind of tilting the glass on its side and rotating it.
And with carbonated beverages in general, swirling and kind of doing this isn't as highly recommended either as with others, because as you swirl it and shake it up, you're basically telling the carbonation to dissipate faster, right?
Sure.
Like you're making that. And so really that's where we recommend small glasses, because instead of swirling, what we would recommend you do, I don't have this in my glass, but top it off a little bit, put your hand on it, bring it to your nose.
For the third step,
And
which
then,
is
yeah,
sniff.
sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Yeah.
That's okay.
But because swirling isn't as good for carbonated beverages, that's really the approach to get the same effect that you would get with swirling wine, which is really to get those aromas aerated into your nose. It's really just topping it off so it's freshly carbonated and getting it to your nose as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you know, with something that's not carbonated, swirling releases the aromas because there's more surface area of the liquid that's being exposed to the air so that they can volatilize and be released. The bubbles that carbonation or nitrogenation cause create the same surface area effect, releasing that you know, aromatic profile. Second Chance is a really fun beer as well. This is
We've had this a few times. We've featured this in corporate events quite a few times. We really enjoy this amber ale.
Second Chance is one of our domestic beers that is made in an Irish style. This amber ale, and maybe one would say Scottish, because Mulligan is a golf term.
Yeah.
But it also relates to Second Chance.
You know, it's funny, Second Chance on their website actually refers to this as an Irish style red ale, even though it says amber ale on their can.
Yeah.
So it's a little confusing to me because they're calling it both, but they do refer to it as an Irish style kind of red ale, even though it's.
But Second Chance is a really cool brewery. They are really heavily invested in adoption agencies for abandoned pets.
Yeah, that's the Second Chance part of it.
Yeah. The Mulligan, when you mess up and cut it off the fairway and you got to go hunt for your ball, that ball that gets lost out there is given a second chance when it finds a new home. And they spend, I think that, you know, a significant amount of their proceeds go to local shelters that help find new homes for dogs and other pets that are abandoned by their owners. So a great cause and a really delicious beer.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, like we said, we've featured this in corporate events quite a few times because we just keep coming back to it as like, this is a great amber ale. And I just threw in the chat there that this is as much as like the last one would pair very well with fish and chips. And I think we put that in our, SipScout report. This is really what I want with fish and chips. And I think it's because of that like malt with the fish and chips, and it feels maltier and like it feels like a good complement to it.
Is that what I suggested?
I think on the last one, on the first one, golden ale, which I do think would be great with fish and chips because it's bright and effervescent and like lovely.
Yeah.
But this is the one that, because I feel like it almost replaced the malt with the French fries and everything for me. Yeah. Exactly. Drink with purpose, Kristen. We love it. Yeah. That's that's really the whole purpose of what we do is, like not only a purpose of giving back to the animals, but like drinking thoughtfully and drinking,
drink
savoring.
like you care.
Yeah, drink like you care. Exactly. Yeah, I really like this one a lot. Are we on our third step of nosing?
Yeah, so as Suzanne was suggesting with beers, it's nice to be able to just splash and top off what you're drinking and maybe put your hand over the glass and let it collect there.
I'll showcase.
And
I'll be
then-
on a white for you.
Take a little inhale. And that's the best time to be looking at those beer wheels
Right.
that we shared earlier. Having something like that as a visual aid in front of you in that moment is highly recommended. Your sense of smell is something that is generally underutilized. It's not really needed in today's day and age the way it might have been, 20,000 years ago when
In
we
the
were.
caveman era,
Yeah.
you can smell everything before you
Is
put it in
this
your mouth
rotten?
to make
Like,
sure
is
it's
this poisonous? Am I tracking the right animal? Is it tracking me? Do I need to turn around to get a bigger spear?
That's actually, and what he's talking about right now, that's one of the reasons it's often so impressive to us everyday commoners when sommeliers and people who've trained their nose can stick their nose in a glass of something and say, stewed cherries with a hint of lavender. And we're just like, what? Like, because we're not training it regularly. We don't use our nose like that. We don't have to identify smells without seeing the thing. And when you train your nose, you do. When you were training to become a sommelier, you were kind of creating those smell memories.
It's like studying for any kind of test. You have to continually expose yourself to the information to be able to retain it and then regurgitate it, I guess. So
Evan would walk through the grocery stores and put sage in his nose and be like, sage,
close my
sage.
eyes.
And because you're trying to get your brain to just
It's like doing flashcards.
exactly.
And the more you do it, just like practicing free throws, it is something that you can get better at. So if you're curious, that would be my recommendation. Smell everything, smell it all. And when you do, take a moment and kind of clear your mind and just focus exclusively on what you smell.
And this is where
And
those
then wrap it up
wheels-
and tuck it away. And then you'll bring it back.
And this is where those wheels can be very helpful
Right.
because when you're first starting out with this, it's very hard to even come up with a single thing
It's
sometimes.
fleeting. You'll get it, but it'll be gone. And if you have something to reference in front of you,
Then you can land on something and then smell it again and try to find it and kind of keep doing it. And while this might seem silly to some of you, and it might seem like, why am I going to waste my time doing that? Who cares? Like we said, your nose is 80% of what you taste. So imagine if your sense of smell got better. If you were, as you were bringing a drink to your mouth, you were like, oh, wow, that smells like XYZ, then what you're tasting is going to be all that much more compelling and interesting.
Right.
So we highly recommend it. And the more you do it with someone, the more you just articulate out loud as you're drinking, does this smell like bubble yum to you? And that's a totally valid thing. The more outlandish it is, the more just visceral that oh my God, this smells like Pop Rocks, whatever the heck that, right? That's the most interesting place to start. So don't ever be ashamed of that's probably not what this smells like. Who cares? That doesn't matter. Because what your brain is doing is it's connecting, what technically, I don't know, give me something what technically honey smells like versus the chemical composition of this beer. The chromosomes there's a few of them that are kind of similar to honey, and your brain is connecting the dots and approximating that kind of smells like honey. There's not actually honey in it, but that's what's happening.
Yeah, it's maybe there's a carbon chain that's missing and it's close.
Yeah.
And that's the shared language. That's the problem. It's one of the biggest challenges. We can all collectively as a society, as humanity, agree, with, language barriers excluded, that green, because it's St. Patrick's Day, is green.
Right.
We can all say yep, that's green. I can recognize that's green. That's green. There's shades of green. There's hues of green. There's tones of green, but it's green. There's flavors. We can kind of all agree on the basic flavors: salty, sour, bitter, sweet, umami. I feel like umami is still kind of hard for some people. But everything that's smell related is it's an analogy. It smells like something. It doesn't smell of anything. I mean, it smells of like tetranitrotoluene. No, that's
I don't know.
TNT.
I don't even know what that word. Yeah, I'm like, I don't know what that is.
It smells of a chemical, but being able to relate that to something else, because so many smells are a combination of multiple smells
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
define an individual component. Anyway,
We're
smells
geeking
pretty
out.
cool.
We're geeking out. Honestly, we could spend hours just talking about smell and Evan in particular, because it is such a big component of this. So, all right, this next trivia question here. If you read your SipScout report, you have a leg up. So it's a nice little test for us who's reading their SipScout reports. Kilkenny is the right answer for this one. And that's where, you know, if you read the SipScout report, we talked a little bit about how Kilkenny was once the like capital of brewing in Ireland, and then all of these breweries started closing, and then Sullivan brought it back. And if you're wondering why our beers are disappearing as we do this, if you want to, so sometimes, you know, we get the question of like, I don't really want to drink 4 beers in one night. What do I do? So the way to keep the carbonation carbonated, even though it's open, is to keep it cold. So we have an ice bucket right below us. And so as we're moving through them, we're just dropping it back in the ice bucket. So feel free to throw it back in the fridge. And then you can kind of keep enjoying it later if you're not going to drink all of them right now, which no judgment if you are going to drink them all right now. That's totally up to you.
If you've got a bottle of champagne that you opened and you're not planning on finish it, just leave it in the ice bucket. It'll probably still be carbonated the next morning, and then you can have mimosas.
Should you put like a little something in the opening?
Honestly,
Like a little paper towel or something even? Not really?
Nothing that, unless it seals it and it's
Completely
pressure
seals it?
and is like pressure capable.
No, doesn't matter at all.
It really doesn't matter.
Okay. But coldness.
But cold,
really
will just
matters.
keep the carbon dioxide in solution instead of releasing.
The more you know.
Dun, 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 dun.
All right, we have our next poll up.
And we've got our next beer up.
Yes.
So this is also an Irish red ale. This one's an actual Irish red ale instead of one that they call an amber ale, despite the fact that it's an Irish red ale. And I would say,
I'm going to pour this in mine because I want to compare the colors of these two.
Good idea.
Yeah, right.
I would say that an Irish red ale and a stout,
Dry Irish stout in particular,
would probably be the most like individually Irish types
styles
of beers that you would find out there. Many of the beers that you would find in Ireland are not red or a dry stout, but they really did a great job at kind of defining red ales and stouts, so that most people that make red ales and stouts outside of Ireland are mimicking Irish style. Let's compare these.
pretty similar.
Crikey, they can't even tell them apart.
Pretty darn similar. Yeah, for sure. All right, so our next poll question, I'm just gonna pop us through this one because it's a pretty straightforward one here. The Gaelic word for beer.
Y'all better not miss this one.
Well, not everyone got it.
Oh no!
But they're all alcohol related. So I don't know how to, you do better with.
Oh no, our
No.
Gaelic is,
No.
this is,
No idea how to pronounce that.
I mean,
So we're gonna say,
I know the Gaelic terms that I already know. I don't know like pronunciation guidelines.
we should have, next time we know, we'll have to look up how to say.
Brewery.
But so diolch means drink in Gaelic.
So it could
So
be.
want to drink.
All right,
Um,
half point.
alcohol, I think we can all guess means alcohol. And bior, or however, I might be butchering it. I'm really sorry if I'm butchering it.
Beer.
Is the correct answer. So that's beer. So now next time you're in Ireland, you can order your beer properly. By the way, has anyone watched the first episode of Ted Lasso? I know this isn't the same country, but I'm just kind of, we haven't watched it yet. And it just came out yesterday. Are you guys aware that Ted Lasso is back? Season 3 just came back yesterday. I think we're going to watch it tonight. We're very excited. We're only one country away. We're right there. We're so close.
Oh my gosh, the Irish would be furious.
I'm just saying geographically we're close. I'm saying it's the same country. I am excited. All right.
Mm.
I haven't tasted it yet because you have it in your
Oh,
glass.
here. I'm gonna go back to this one.
Oh, the smell is very different though. So this can be kind of fun to do. We often recommend having, especially if you have small glasses, having them poured so you can kind of compare and contrast. Despite them being very similar in color, the nose is pretty different. Like this is this almost is, what's the ABV on this one versus that one? Because this one smells like it like hits a little harder.
And it's actually lighter. The
it
Mulligan's
is.
5.6 and
Interesting.
the
Like,
O'Hara's is 4.3.
does anyone else get that? Like, I feel like the Irish, the O'Hara's Irish Red smells boozier to me.
I feel like it's maltier. I feel like it's deeper. I feel like this one is
That might be what I'm smelling.
a little bit more like hop driven.
Sure. But what are Scottish ales like really kind of malty, boozy? There's something that
Scottish
smells
ales
very much
Like to
like.
be pretty high octane.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's almost what this smells like to me. And it's very good.
Yeah, this
That is
definitely has a
surprising,
lot
it's
of
only 4.3.
deeper notes to it. This is, I feel like there's more like molasses and chicory, like on that scale of like the malt wheel. This is skewing towards, you know, past the toasty end of things.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's only a few hours away, the next poll has to do with St. Patrick's Day. And if any of you have visited any of these cities on St. Patrick's Day, you would guess that
They had something.
they all care
Yeah,
about St. Patrick's Day.
for sure.
Um,
I'm from Massachusetts, so I have always guessed Boston. That's always been my guess of like, of course,
Boston for everything.
right? Of course, St. Patrick's Day.
What's the most important city in the country? Boston.
No, not really.
Independent of anything Irish. Give me a question about Boston. But this particular question
It's pretty interesting. We're gonna get into some history on this one because it's a pretty interesting one for sure. Does anyone have any fun St. Patrick's Day plans? Do you guys celebrate St. Patrick's Day? I feel like, back when we were all in college, we all probably certainly did, but I don't know, I really like St. Patrick's Day partially because I really like to make Irish soda bread, which I don't know that I have all the ingredients to make it for tomorrow, but if you've never made Irish soda bread, Kristen, I see that you're here, and I know you're a baker. Have you made Irish soda bread before? Because it is glorious. Like because it's sweet and savory. And so Irish soda bread, the leavening in Irish soda bread is baking soda instead of yeast. And then it has caraway in it, which is kind of the savory component, but then it also has either currants or raisins in it, but I love it with golden raisins. So golden raisins and caraway in soda bread is so good. And then you just like put it in the toaster oven in the morning and put a little butter and honey on it, and it is magical. I love it. It's really, really quite delicious.
I feel like I like St. Patrick's Day when I live somewhere where there's what I feel like is an authentic feeling public house, like
that really celebrates.
And I feel like the delineation between calling something a pub and a public house, even though that's what it's short for, is helpful. Like a public house, in my mind, is really a place that is kind of a community center, where there's a lot of regulars. They, know one another, and they can come there for support, and they can come there to air grievances, and they might get a little ribbing, and they might get a hug.
Wait, what's the word for ribbing, Annie?
Oh,
so Evan actually worked at an Irish bar, an Irish pub for a while, right? Rosie McCaffrey's when he was in college.
Yeah, and I'd moonlight there a couple nights a week. A friend of mine was the GM, and he needed help on the busy nights. And yeah, it was an interesting experience because I'd been to what were quote unquote pubs before, but this was the first time I'd been to one that really felt like there was that sense of community to it. And that made me like St. Patrick's Day a lot more.
Sure. Of course.
Because while working there on St. Patrick's Day was a nightmare. It was the most like debilitating thing.
Sure.
I had a hat like this on and it would be like this the whole time so that nobody could try and make eye contact.
I hate bartenders like you.
And when I was done with what I was doing, I would look around and see who was
And
ready,
hide some more.
and they had their money ready and they knew what their friends wanted, and then you won. But outside of actually St. Patrick's Day, just the sentiment of the idea of that kind of communal space was something that I really became fond of. Yeah, slagging is the term. Slagging, or this one's even better, taking the piss.
What does it mean?
Taking the piss out of someone was basically like deflating their ego, giving them a hard time, teasing them, joshing them, giving them like a little, and in those kind of like communal spaces where everybody knows each other, it's very commonplace. But for somebody that is not yet initiated, can be kind of off-putting,
Well,
like,
especially if you walk into a bar and you don't know about this and you don't know anyone and they're just like, you're ready? Like, what are you doing? You don't know what you want yet? Like, and they're just kind of like almost rude to you.
and I found myself doing it. Like people would walk in and they'd order a beer, and then I'd bring the beer back and then be like, and then can I get a beer for my friend? And I'd be like, why didn't you order that when you ordered your beer?
That must be so fun as a
And then I'd bring the beer back and I'd be like $4, and I'm like, wait, why don't you have your money ready yet?
That must be so fun as a bartender to be like, have permission to like give people a hard time.
But the best part is that when they would be like, kind of like put off by it, Tony sitting at the bar stool right next to him would be like, come on, man, what are you new here? Where's your money? Like, why don't you have your money ready yet?
That's great. I love it.
So it was, and it was never like meant to like make someone feel bad.
Sure.
It was
ribbing. Gentle ribbing.
Yeah, but taking the piss out of someone was something that I had a real hard time understanding, like the terminology and the phrase is like, hey, and so somebody might like have been given a hard time for the course of the evening and go home and be like, boy, dear, they were really taking the piss out of me last night at Rosie's. And you're like, wait, what does that mean?
I love it.
Anyway.
Yeah, Kristen, you're right. It is a super fast bread to make. So when people think of making bread, it's often like a whole thing, but this is a very easy, just like quick baking project. Yeah, Scotch ales. I think Scotch ales really are defined by high ABV and high maltiness, are really the two things that define them. And I feel like there was some connection between English strong ales originally and like where Scottish ales came from, that English strong ales, which are also high ABV, and that in Scotland, they would kind of like almost caramelize or burn the sugar that was making the beer that gave it that like super overpowering.
And I wouldn't be surprised if literally adding caramel prior to fermentation would have, one, been even recognized, or two, outlawed, but like that elevated booziness by doing something as simple as that would also complement that characteristic flavor of an English strong ale.
All right, before we crack into our
there's no scotch in it.
No, there is no scotch in it, but so it did or originate in Scotland.
That's not why it's boozy. They don't just like glug a little bit of whiskey in there and send it out.
All right, before we crack into our fourth beer, let's do this fun trivia question here. So I'm just going to walk through all of them here, and let me just tell you, y'all got it wrong. So yeah, Boston is definitely like a great guess. New York is a great guess. Savannah and St. Augustine, like what? So St. Augustine, Florida is the right answer because.
But wait.
Well, it depends what you're defined, but everywhere that I've looked, this is what they say.
The qualifications for all four of these can be argued.
For sure. Because, are we talking post 1776 when the United States was actually right? Like, so no, we're not. We're just talking about the land mass of the United States. And St. Augustine, Florida had the very first ever recorded St. Patrick's Day parade in 1601.
Hot diggity.
1601 was the very first recorded St. Patrick's Day parade in the world, actually. And then let's see what was next. I think Boston was next. So in 1737, it was still a British American colony. And it was actually a dinner held by the Charitable Irish Society, which is the oldest Irish society in America. And they still hold a dinner on March 17th every single year. So that's been going on since 1737, which blows my freaking mind that's crazy. And then New York is considered the oldest and largest St. Patrick's Day parade in the world since 1762. So while St. Augustine had one in 1601, I'm imagining it wasn't continuous, whereas New York City has kind of been doing it since 1762. And then Savannah, Georgia is kind of, I don't know, like that seems odd to me.
I mean, that's
Savannah,
in
Georgia.
the same vein as St. Augustine, because that's where people that were,
Immigrating.
colonists first arrived on the shores
Sure.
after coming up from,
Yeah.
the Caribbean.
And so they are known for having just a huge St. Patrick's Day celebration, and they've been doing it since 1813, which is also a very long time. So they're actually the only one post the United States actually becoming the United States. But regardless.
No, not as big as New York, but the influx of people that come to Savannah for the St. Patrick's Day celebration there, to my recollection, roughly doubles the size of the city, which
Wow.
is bonkers. The St. Patrick's Day celebration in New York, I would imagine, is a lot of New Yorkers, and nevertheless, the city is big enough that even if there's a ton of people that come in, the influx is not percentage-wise.
Sure.
Anyway,
Yeah.
all cities that really appreciate St. Patrick's Day.
And Chicago also really appreciates St. Patrick's Day with them dyeing their river green
That's true. That's
every year. Does anyone have any guesses about how many pounds of vegetable dye? This is not a trivia question that's going to be up there. I'm going rogue here. How many pounds of vegetable dye it takes to dye the Chicago River green?
7.
Evan's answer. You're not supposed to answer 7 to things that have a quantity in them.
That's true.
I'll ask Evan.
How much
Evan.
do you like Irish beer?
Yeah, I'll just ask Evan, like, what's the weather going to be like today? And he's like 7. This is like snarky answer to everything.
Not snark. Genuine. It's
Nonsensical.
authentic.
Nonsensical.
Earnest.
Yeah.
Ah.
Everyone voted on this last one real quick. Everyone knew the answer immediately, 100%. We got 100% right on the first one here. This is the first one we got 100% right
Let's
on.
move along. Let's
All
open
right,
ours.
for our fourth beer, I guess. Yes. Irish Stout, exactly. Often served nitrogenated. So to dye the Chicago River green every year, it takes 40 pounds of vegetable dye, which actually didn't seem like that much to me. But I guess, I don't know how
Is this
pervasive.
solid vegetable dye, or is this already like,
Liquid.
is this like,
I don't know.
the dye that you get for like baking, the
I'm not sure.
liquid plus?
I didn't get those details.
So curiously enough, despite this last trivia question,
Oh, wait, Kristen, Savannah dyes the river green? Interesting.
yeah, they do it too.
Oh, I didn't know that.
For
I didn't,
sure.
I actually
yeah.
don't think I knew there was like
Anybody else would do it?
a river.
Yeah.
in Savannah.
Yeah, the
Interesting.
River District, that's a big delta right there.
I've never been to Savannah. It's one of the places that I've always said that I want to go. I always joke that, women everywhere else, when it's like sweaty and humid, we just look gross. And in the South, they just look like sexy and like sultry all the time for some reason.
They're glowing.
They like manage the humidity
They
because
just-
they live with
They
it
just
all.
glow.
Whereas we all just look like matted down and like, oh my God, it's so hot. And the Southerners just look like sexy and sultry in the summer.
So curiously enough, despite the fact that all of you answered the last question correctly, this is an example of an Irish stout that is not nitrogenated.
Wait, can you get nitrogenated in the can?
Yeah, Guinness came up with a
That's
technique
right.
of doing that in like the mid-90s. But to point out the detail of the answer given there is that it's a draft Irish stout. This is
Because that's
not
typically how you
a draft Irish stout.
nitrogenate, right?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to hook up a nitrogen tank to your tap
Keg,
system
Sure.
than to use the little widgets that you may or may not have seen, experienced, enjoyed with a Guinness or a Boddington's or a Murphy's or any number of other
Yeah, wait, does anyone
Stouts.
know? Throw it in the, oh yeah, I like that, Kristen. Southern women don't sweat, we perspire. I like it.
Yes.
Does anyone know how they nitrogenate in the can? Like, can you
I
throw
think I just
something?
gave it away.
No, I don't think you did.
Okay.
I don't think you did. Because I was blown away, like, I didn't understand this. Like, I knew there was kind of always something going on in there, but I don't understand it.
It's real weird.
I wish we had, we should have got a Guinness to
Demonstrate?
show it. Yeah. But Guinness isn't craft, so we can't do that, you know, sorry.
It's pretty neat. So basically there's this thing called a widget, this little ball, and inside the ball, there's a predetermined amount of nitrogen pressurized in a canister. And the whole canning process takes place in a pressurized environment. And the widget doesn't open under the pressurized environment that it's canned in. So it's put into the can, sealed. The beer is placed in the can. The lid is placed on the can, and then it goes outside of the pressurized environment. But because the can is sealed at that time, it doesn't matter. And then when you pop the lid of the can, the pressure inside of the can releases, matching the environmental like atmosphere pressure, which means that the pressure on the widget becomes such that it can pop open and eject all of its nitrogen into the beer, which means that as soon as you open it, you have to turn the can upside down so the nitrogen stays in the can, pressurizing the beer in the can as it pours out into your glass.
So if you've ever had
Pretty
a can,
fascinating.
if you've ever had a can of Guinness, it's that little like ball that's basically left behind after you pour and so crack open, like open up the can and get that little ball out and take a look at it, because it's really pretty cool. Like it's a cool innovation for sure to allow you to have this nitrogenated kind of experience from a can. Yeah. All right, we did it. We tricked them. We tricked them good. We're talking about Irish beers. We're talking about St. Patrick's Day. The first European beer import after Prohibition was actually Heineken.
Sorry, it was
Yeah,
mean.
which
It's
is
green though.
It is in a green bottle. It's from the Netherlands. And so they were the first, and they've had a very stronghold on kind of the import market in the United States for a very long time. So yeah, was not Irish, that one.
Let's talk about this Irish Stout here though for a little bit, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, it's few and far between that I feel like I drink a stout that isn't nitrogenated.
Mm-hmm.
And what this does to like the texture is really kind of interesting. Like the fact that it's a little bit more lively on the tongue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, versus like rich and velvety kind of.
Yeah, it like dances more instead of like a mousse or a cream kind of texture. So it almost makes it seem like kind of fruity.
Mm-hmm.
There's like this like kind of cherry or like.
I could see that. The cherry in particular. Yeah, and if you think about when you pour a Guinness in your glass, how much foam and head you have on that. And that's kind of a classic, you know.
Sure.
You get the little mustache versus this, it dissipates very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it is more lively and more bright kind of than.
Yeah, interesting to see that take on an Irish Stout. And you know, while it doesn't indicate it does say dry. I was gonna say, like, this feels a little bit richer for me. And frankly, I think it is.
And that's an interesting thing too. So a lot of people think the darker the beer, the heavier it is. You know, like you hear a lot of people say like, oh, I can't drink those dark beers, they're too heavy. But that's not kind of a misnomer.
Oh yeah, very
Right?
much so. I mean,
So-
with Guinness being a perfectly fine example. If any of you are anticipating enjoying St. Patrick's Day tomorrow and happen to have a Guinness in your fridge,
Yeah.
you might pull it out and take note of the fact that Guinness actually includes nutritional information on the can, because the alcohol percentage is low enough that it is actually governed by the Food and Drug Administration instead of well, it's not the ATF anymore. What is it? The TTB. So anything below a certain alcohol percentage, I think it's 4.5, has to include nutritional information. And Guinness, part of the reason that Guinness floats, you might have seen beers being served at an Irish pub where Guinness is poured on top of a lighter beer. It looks pretty dramatic. The reason it floats is because it's lighter in gravity, because it's only like 3.2% alcohol. You can really drink a lot of Guinness
And be very, yeah,
comparatively, like
to an
for some
to an
people,
American
like
IPA in particular.
you feel full, but as far as consuming alcohol, you can drink. It's like going to Utah and drinking beer. Like it doesn't.
A lot
really
of them
have
are lower ABV. Yeah, for sure.
Near-
And it is,
near
and,
beer.
and you think it's going like, you know, and this is where the whole eating with your eyes kind of idea, like you look at this and you're like, that's going to be heavy. That's
It's a
going to be
big
thick.
piece of
That's going
chocolate.
to be a lot. And then you take a sip of it and it's really not. It's pretty light. It's pretty,
I mean, this one has some weight to
a
it.
little bit more than Guinness
Yeah.
for sure. But yeah, Michael, I love where your head is at. Great stout chocolate cake. Send us a piece of that if you make it.
I mean, I'm just gonna go get some Reese's peanut butter cups.
And you eat it with this. Yeah, that would be pretty delicious
That's
too.
what's happening.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what's gonna happen.
I have to say, I don't love the can art on this one. Although I think they're trying to look like O'Reilly's.
Oh, yeah.
Like the O'Reilly's
Oh yeah,
auto parts, which I guess.
O'Reilly.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, really? Oh, really? Yeah,
Um.
that's kind of fun.
Oh, this is apropos. This is
Kristen, that's fun. That's so fun. I didn't know that.
Oh
fact.
man,
That's amazing.
The old Guinness advertisements prescribing the health effects of Guinness are.
I mean, alcohol in
fantastic.
general, to some degree.
But this is a great beer question, considering that we've got a stout in front of us now.
This is not an oyster beer that we're drinking right now, but there are oyster beers. Are you guys familiar with this? Are you familiar with oyster stouts? Have you
Oyster
tried an
stout?
oyster stout? It sounds real weird.
It is real weird.
Honestly, they're delicious though, because it's
Yeah.
really, I feel like most of the time it's the oyster shells that are kind of more
Yeah,
used
it's
than
not
actual
like
oysters.
The meat.
But it lends this salinity to a stout that kind of is really fascinating. I was actually, and so there are quite a few of them out there. There are actually some American craft makers who make them now as well. The correct answer to this one is porterhouse. Yeah, true, Bob. Never find a liquor store in Utah. It is hard. But porterhouse makes a really pretty well-renowned oyster beer, to the fact that like when they first launched it way back when, they actually told people like not suitable for vegetarians because there were oysters in the beer that they were making. And so they really lend a nice salinity. I was lucky enough to be in San Sebastian, Spain at a brewery talking to them, and Spain is right on the coast and they have this great kind of seafood culture. And they had made an oyster stout there with oysters that they kind of brought in fresh. And man, they're just really delicious. I really like oyster stouts a lot. They sound weird, but they're quite compelling. There's only 7. Oh yeah. 7. 7's the answer to everything.
I mean, that actually might be the answer
That
as
might be
far
the
as how
answer.
many liquor stores exist in Utah.
Yeah, it is a little challenging there, but they're good. They're getting better. They're getting a little more open to it, and they have, you know, but they're where they used to be.
You used to have to get a membership to go into a bar,
Oh, I didn't know that.
which means that if you wanted to go into a bar, you had to stand outside the bar and wait for someone to go into the bar and ask them to sponsor you, because in order to become a member, you needed to have a sponsor.
What?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. I felt like when we were in Utah a couple of years ago, like we drank beer just, and it was delicious beer. Like we had some local Utah beer and at restaurants and bars and stuff, but we didn't ever try to go to like a liquor store and like
Because
buy.
they don't exist.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, even some restaurants require memberships. Interesting.
Mhm.
Fascinating. Malt and chocolate flavor in beer. I feel like this could be like a trick question too on me because I'm not, yeah. Evan hasn't seen all these full questions on this. What do you
Wow,
think the answer is?
you threw some stumpers in here, huh?
If they're saying they're stumpers, I'm quite proud. I'm quite proud.
And a bit of chocolate.
What's your guess?
I'm gonna go with the popular vote.
Which is what?
I'm not giving away what everybody
Oh.
voted for yet.
All right. Oh, we have everyone who
I'm
voted.
throwing,
Everyone
I'm
voted.
throwing in with
Go ahead.
a lot of all y'all.
What are you throwing in with?
O'Hara's. Nope.
Guinness. The last person who just voted in there, we got it. Guinness. Yeah. Yes.
What are you gonna do?
Although I don't know that I've had O'Hara's Celtic Stout, so I'm not sure. That might have a little bit of chocolate in it too. Like, you know, who knows? All right, we're on to our
It's all a matter of perception, right?
yeah.
Subjective world.
All right, we're on to our last poll question.
Hot diggity. How many Olympic-sized swimming pools of Guinness?
But how many million pints is an Olympic sized swimming pool of? Do the math. Do the math.
Well, I'm not gonna do the math. I'm gonna have Google do the math.
No. Yeah, this is a good one. Did we finish all of our tasting techniques? We might not have, the last one, right?
That's true.
So, well, two of them actually, I guess. The second to last one is
All
sip.
these trivia questions
I'm
have
sorry,
thrown
I'm
me for a
distracting
loop.
you. So the second to last step of your tasting techniques is obviously to take a sip. And so we've been doing a lot of that. And when you do take a sip, you know, especially if you're trying wine or whiskey or something where you're a little more sheepish and you're like, I'm not sure if I'm going to like it. Evan always likes to say, don't just take a little bird peck and put a little tiny bit in your mouth and then make a judgment on it. You know, you really need to get enough to coat your palate and really like think through it. And you want to take 2 sips. So the first sip that you ever take of something is just priming your palate, is just getting your mouth used to what that tastes like. And especially if you're doing what we just did here tonight, where you're changing between beer 1, beer 2, beer 3, that first sip of the next beer, your mouth is just kind of like, whoa, that's different. What's going on there, right? So it's not a really good sip to evaluate. So you want to just take that one. And when you take your first sip, you actually want to kind of like hold it in your mouth a little bit and gently swish it around so it touches the sides of your cheeks, the roof of your mouth, the fronts of your gums, under your tongue. You really want to kind of like just get your whole mouth really acclimated with what that new flavor profile is. And then you want to swallow it down, and then you want to take a second sip. And on that second sip, now that you're acclimated, is when you can really start to assess, like, do I like it? Does it taste like the way I thought it was going to taste based on what it smelled like? And so that's where you want to really assess on your sip. And then the last step is savor or spit. And so either one is totally acceptable. So you can spit if you're just tasting for, you know, academic reasons and really trying to understand what it tastes like. But the reason why this last step is important is because the finish. So when you swallow something or have it in your mouth for a minute and then spit it out, what's going on in your mouth for the next 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, minutes, right? And that's called the finish, the finish of the drink that you just had. And we've all had things where we've taken a sip of something and we've, you know, really like taken a sip and then we are like, oh, like as we swallow it down, where it has a bite or it feels like out of balance or it kind of like jars us in some way,
Yeah.
right? Something like, and so that can be a very good indicator that something's out of balance. And when something's out of balance, that's often a sign of quality, right? Because if you have a very high quality winemaker, brewer, or something like that, they know how to balance all the flavors, the savory, the sweetness, the maltiness, the hoppiness, right?
And optimally, what you taste initially and then what you're tasting when you swallow will be, you know, an enjoyable kind of progression. They might move a little bit, but it won't be. And then once you swallow it, once you hit that point, it'll be just kind of a persistence, a continuation that lingers. And generally that's one of the kind of earmarks that you can look at for indications of quality. If the persistence of something is lengthy and has fidelity to the taste profile and the, what you were enjoying when it was in your mouth after it no longer is, a good nod to the tenets of balance that allow for that, basically.
Yeah, and so that last part of it is a really good indicator of just quality, and it's an important thing. We often say it's really important to be able to differentiate between, I like this and it's well made, right? That's what people who are, enthusiastic and really like kind of learn about this stuff can do. They can say, I don't really like this, but it's beautifully made. It's a wonderful beer. It's a wonderful wine, but it's not for me. It's not my palate, versus just being like, ew, that's gross. That's a very different thing to be able to appreciate the craftsmanship behind it, but say it's not for you, or to say, you know what, this isn't super well made. I can tell that, like the balance is off. It's kind of jarring to me, but I'm kind of enjoying it. It's kind of my jam. I kind of like it. That's okay too, right? Like there are times and places and situations where you don't need a super high quality, but it still tastes good to you based on what you're eating, based on your mood, like whatever the case may be. So being able to differentiate those things, the, quality versus preference, is really what helps you be a good taster. Ooh,
Yeah,
cream ales.
Yeah, Michael, thank you. I don't think that cream ale necessarily has nitrogen. I do feel like it is far more common to find cream ales on nitro. And especially up until recently, you couldn't can nitrogenated beer until like, the creation of the widget.
What do we think on our
pints of
full? What's your
Guinness?
guess?
Well, I did some math.
Okay.
And
hit us with your math.
I think it's 3 pools.
3 pools is how many million pints?
13.
13?
So some of you got it right.
Yeah, that is the right answer.
It's
13
funny.
million pints of Guinness.
It's funny how small 3 Olympic pools sounds compared to 13 million pints.
It does sound very small. Yeah. That sounds like there must be much more. But I do think a lot of people are drinking things other than Guinness nowadays, right? So maybe if that was 20 years ago, when the only Irish beer people were familiar with was Guinness.
What do you think the number is for pints of Bud Light dyed green with food dye?
So sad. Whatever the number is, it's so sad.
Please don't do that tomorrow.
Yeah, don't put green.
Wherever you are,
It's not necessary. It doesn't make it taste better. It doesn't make it. Just wear some green. You're fine.
Otherwise, you get pinched.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
Some other helpful hints when visiting Irish pubs here or abroad. Don't order Irish car bombs. People don't take kindly to that, especially if they're Irish, especially if they're from Northern Ireland. And oddly enough, as popular as that is, there's another beer combination that is equally offensive, but not nearly as understandably offensive, and that's a black and tan. If you've enjoyed beers like we were describing earlier that have Guinness on top of something, half and half is Guinness on top of Harp. Both Guinness and Harp are Irish beers. A black and tan is Guinness on top of Bass. Bass is an English beer, and Guinness, of course, is an Irish beer, but black and tans have a historical reference during the occupation and control of Northern Ireland, where the British Army would conscript Irishmen to serve in the British Army, fighting against the Irish, and they weren't deemed worthy enough to have a full army uniform. They were just given the jacket. So they just had their tan jacket and then their black slacks. So the black and tans in the eyes of the Irishmen that were fighting against the British Army were their turncoat neighbors. They were basically traitors to the, Irish country. So it's a subtle one, but black and tans can be a very contentious drink order at the wrong Irish pub.
That's interesting. You've told me that before, and I always forget that a little bit. And then there's also the snake bite, which is one of my favorites.
That's a great one. Or the black velvet.
Yeah, well, so the snake bite is Guinness and cider.
Snake bite is cider and lager.
I don't know. I just looked it up to make sure.
I feel
Guinness
like
and cider.
I feel like Guinness and
Google disagrees with
I
you.
feel like Guinness and cider I've always referred to as the black velvet, but the black velvet was
What's a snake bite to you then?
cider and lager,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
and the black velvet was from the death of a noble, maybe a prince, and they at the wake they wanted people to have something that was
I
black,
do remember something about that
but
story.
they wanted it to be champagne because the wake is a celebration, and so it was
Maybe black
Guinness,
velvet is champagne and Guinness
definitely.
originally.
And then I think that cider replaced it because it was carbonated.
Got it.
And
And champagne's a little pricey.
yeah,
Cool.
anyway, I thought that was, and that's the thing that, I mean, I don't know. I remember snake bite being cider and lager.
And whenever you're doing this, if you want to play around with this at home, if you have some cider in your fridge and you have half of this left, or like whatever the case may be, you just pour the Guinness over the back of a spoon as you're pouring it on top. And that kind of helps it stay in a float versus if you just pour it straight out, it plunges straight through and
Maybe it's kind of separate, but it doesn't really give that nice clean line.
yeah. But they're quite fun.
Indeed.
All right, so we're closing down our St. Patrick's Day beer tasting. We hope you learned some fun St. Patrick's Day trivia so you can show off with all your friends and family tomorrow with you're wearing your green and drinking your beers and whatever you may be celebrating, hopefully making some Irish soda bread now. If anyone does want to stick around and happy hour with us and kind of hang out, just ping me, in the chat or personally or whatever, and we can turn it on so you can turn your video on. Otherwise, I know it's late depending on where you're joining from. We have a lot of people joining from the East Coast and Midwest and everything. So if you need to get on your way and get ready for the real St. Patrick's Day tomorrow, then
That's true.
that's okay too. So yeah, thank you for coming, everyone. Next month for SipScout members, next month we have a Margarita Mixology Kit. So it is the evolution of the margarita, which is one of our most popular kits that we do with corporate clients. So we brought it over to the SipScout experience to do it with all of you. And so we basically tell the story of how the margarita came to be in this kit. So you'll get enough in your SipScout kit to make 2 of each cocktail, and there are 3 cocktails. And so we'll be telling the evolution of the margarita just in time for Cinco de Mayo, so that similar to today, you're not going to put green in your beer tomorrow. You're going to drink delicious craft Irish beers. Next month, you're not going to go crazy just downing Jose Cuervo. You're going to learn how to make delicious, amazing margaritas and spin-offs and riffs off margaritas so that you can enjoy Cinco de Mayo in style. And if you're having a Cinco de Mayo party, you'll have 3 new recipes to kind of put to life. So yeah, so we are thrilled to have all of you here, and we hope we see you again next month. Let us know what you think of this new webinar format versus meeting format. We're testing it out, but we love to hear feedback from our SipScout members and non-SipScout members alike. So shoot us an email, Suzanne or Evan at thecraftycast.com. You can always reach us. Vicki,
Thanks, Kristen.
thank
Thanks,
you.
Vicki.
Yes.
We'll leave you with
Michael, everyone else.
a quick Irish toast.
And our cat yowling,
And
apparently.
a cat yowling. No, that's enough. That's enough of that. There are good ships and there are wood ships, the ones that sail the sea. But the best ships are friendships, and may they always be. Concha, happy St. Patrick's Day. Cheers, guys.
Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Cheers.